Okay, in this video, I wanted to talk about a concept that gets, you know, what's the word? Talked about somewhat, but not fully flushed out. And it's, oh, things are harder now. But I'm going to call this sort of the economic opportunities for young Western indigenous men. And it's more about the sort of like the path of least resistance that the boomers, and it doesn't have to necessarily be the boomers, but the generations before the boomers, and just getting progressively harder and harder. And now we're at basically mission impossible. Um, so there is a military terminology called PACE, and that stands for primary, alternate, contingency, and emergency. And the idea is that you're on some sort of a mission and you're going to take in an objective. So you have your basic, everything goes smooth, we're going to do this. So there's an issue, well, we'll just go around this way. If there's an issue, there's a larger issue, we call it back up, and then if, oh shoot, there's a way more hostiles or whatever, then emergency will either back off or we'll call in for air support, yada yada yada, right? So I want to kind of apply this to the way it works, and this is for, primarily guys, because guys have to support themselves and ideally find a girlfriend, have a family and all that. And assuming you're 18, what are your kind of decisions and what are you looking at right now, right? And a lot of this does come down to the I word, inflation. It really freaking does. So, as a boomer, and could be anyone, everyone just typically wants to go down the path of least resistance. And so in primary here, we have go to high school, get a job, a local job, probably in your hometown. Some of these guys didn't even graduate high school. They were able to ride the job in their hometown the whole way. Or a very easy change, like something went wrong with that job, go down the street, get another one. So those sort of entry jobs, first of all, those sort of like basic level ones just barely exist anymore with outsourcing of manufacturing, I'm sorry to say. Good entry-level jobs, so you can still find like a little bit of these like kind of retail jobs here and there, fast food and all that stuff. But the reason, some of the notes I've got on this, again, with inflation as bad as it is, the least paying jobs just aren't an option. You need to the idea is that you're doing those in high school, and then, well, back, at least when I did it, I'm a millennial, a couple of years you would work maybe at summers, and it was kind of a fun time, just make a few extra bucks. But the idea of going back to those for years or as a full-time job, that wasn't even an option really 20 years ago, and it's not an option now. Forgetting about supporting a family, just supporting yourself, it's not even an option economically. And one of the other things is those jobs, they used to allow for full time. They've had these rules in place that they just don't want to give you any sort of full time benefits, so you're not even able to get full time hours while you're making an extremely low wage. And then another issue with those jobs is even those are not as readily available because of mass immigration. Starting to come for those ones too. Another one on the primary I put is trades. So I have some personal experience more on the management side of kind of witnessing this, but the lower skill trades, they're oversaturated and underpaid, in my opinion. I think part of it is just the inflation word again, right? But I looked at I could see what we paid our contractors and drywallers, painters, carpenters, roofers, framers. They all make jack shit, and they work I would say very hard. Maybe the painter, even the painters, they can work pretty hard too, especially if they're doing exterior work. But I think painting the inside of a house is probably not the hardest thing in the world, I should say. But there's going to be lots of jobs where it's not that, or is extremely hard. And these, Mexico has brought in all these guys. They're living who knows how many to a house, and they come in. They don't speak a lick of English. They've got one guy that's on the crew that might say yes, no, thank you, sir. And then they've got their leader who does speak English, and he brings. If the job they try to do it all in a single day if they can. If it takes 20 guys, they'll bring in 20 guys. They knock it out in a day. You're not overworked. You're not outworking that, and you're not going to make any sort of a living. Even living with your parents, you wouldn't have enough to pay for your freaking cell phone bill or your car bill and food bill, even if your rent is free or something like that. Not that all of these are done by, say, Mexicans, but a huge amount of them are. Maybe not as much on the carpenter side. Trucking, also, again, it's an inflation thing. There's lots of horror stories out there, bad drivers, it's a rough life. And the AI is already starting to have an impact. Won't delve too much into AI, but, it'll take away the easiest ones first. That's how it works. So only the extremely complicated routes are gonna still be left, and then all the best parts of the job, just the chill driving, is gonna go away first, and then you get to drive through the ghetto and making all these crazy turns with the freaking 18-wheeler. So you can look into there's whole YouTube channels about guys getting fed up with the trucking lifestyle. It was probably a dream back in the day, like everything, as per the major message of this story. Now, this is actually one that, this is it, man. This is how you're going to get your golden ticket. It's not that, it's just the one I think is the only thing that I could recommend to have your best chance at survival. Not thriving per se, but survival. I don't see any other sort of mainstream option off the top of my head. And they call this the MEP trades. This is the more complicated. That's your HVAC, plumbers, and electrician. And the reason for that is it can't be outnumbered or outsourced and automated. So it has to be local. And requires high IQ and actually some creativity. So it's not just, it takes, once you learn it, that's it. Now there's a lot of creativity involved, and it's also, you are going to be sweating in a good amount of these jobs. Maybe not as much as these guys here, but you're going to be putting in some work. Sometimes you'll be in air conditioned environments, but sometimes you're installing the air conditioning. So if you ever listen to Steve Hoka, he's not wrong to recommend it. It's just, even this is not the golden ticket it once was. It's just, in my opinion, the best option. So that's the MEP trades. Maybe, enough to survive, afford your own place. Probably still not enough to afford a Western family or anything like that. Okay. Moving on, still in the primary sort of slot here, there was the college, the higher IQ jobs. I don't need to, waste too much time on this. If you ever listen to like Aaron Clary and all that, degrees are oversaturated. Bachelor degree, that's been oversaturated since freaking 08, if not earlier. Again, the college admission and DEI, they don't like Western men, if you know what I mean. The guys that actually build the country, they don't like those guys there anymore. Debt enslavement. When I went, so I graduated in what, like 08 or 09. Even back then, it was already debt enslavement. I mean, talking to guys 10 years later, I finally paid off my freaking 35 years old. I finally paid off my freaking college. Now I can afford to like buy a car, and then and they try to get into the housing market 5 years after that, and it's like, oh, they're just screwed. But that was back then how bad it was. I did a basic, just an AI search, and they're saying now it could be 20 years to pay off your college debt for a bachelor's degree, let alone master's or PhD or any of that crap. So over and under in my opinion, I really think the over and under for an average person getting an average degree would have been around the year 2000, in all honesty. So entering into college in 2000, even for the sort of, I won't say the basket weaving, but just nothing like a business degree, was still probably worth it. There is the argument to be made that it's a fun time and you're with young people, and your best opportunity to meet chicks as well and all that, and then networking. Even the real air quote degrees, I think the over under for those was about 10 to 15 years ago. Again, I got out in 2009. Even my degree, which was a real degree, it may or may not have been in engineering. It helped, but it was like I did a hero's journey, and it was like, oh, here's a nickel. The other guy's got a penny. That's just kind of how I felt with that. So while all the other people were mostly partying and were just really not, working as hard, get out of the gate making 50 or 60K, and they're making 40, but just a hellish jobs. Even the jobs themselves are just very, very not fun. But yeah, I wouldn't recommend the whole get an engineering degree now. That's old news, especially now in the present. The other thing with these jobs, back in the day, you get your college degree and then you get a good job, right? And then you used to get something called a pension. And I'm saying something called a pension because I wonder if in 18 years, there's probably people now that are turning into adults that actually, they might not have even heard what a pension is. It's going to become a historical reference. Meanwhile, I've heard, back in the day, I remember hearing about some of these boomers, maybe late Gen Xers, silent Gen, having 2 or 3 pensions. Sometimes they have a wife who had a pension too. It's like the guy went into the military and then he got out and he was a cop. And so they made all the great money, had full-time employment, and then they've got like 3 pensions, not counting all of the assets they accumulated and all that stuff. So it worked like a charm for the people in the past, but you don't have pensions and you don't even have 401ks, because I remember I did have a 401k in the first job out of college, or the second one I should say, and I think I had another one in another job after that, but I noticed it got, like, the benefits of that 401k were like way worse, and now there's just nothing. So the last 2 companies that I worked with over the past, call it 6 years or so, there's no 401k. Even things like bonuses, I noticed a progression. 4 jobs, first job, amazing bonuses. Second job, third job, here's some money for some tools once a year. And then third job, what's a bonus? So yeah, that's on the going to college because you're going to get a better paying job. That's a thing of the past. Moving on to the alternate one. So I talked about like starting your YouTube channel. Hey, I'm doing a YouTube channel now. There's no intent on this to change the world, save the world, maybe even to make a single dime. I'm just kind of doing this for the fun of it, to kind of aid to the army of schizos, I guess. But the YouTube world is oversaturated, it's controlled, and it's censored. And it's centralized, I should say. It's more of like the winner takes all. So some guy who decided to make funny cat videos 10 years ago, he gets his 10 million subscribers. But you deciding to talk about right-wing politics Assuming you don't get censored, and alienated from your friends and family, you get a few hundred subscribers and then kicked off to BitChute. But even if you were going to do a normie topic, it's oversaturated at this point. And yeah, you could there's always some weird way you could do something online, but even that's been saturated. Kind of having to do with this next one, like Amazon, right? So starting a retail business, like brick and mortar, selling stuff at a brick and mortar store. That almost should be its own video, because it's almost like, do we live in a simulation when you go to these stores and you know how much commercial rental space costs, and then you see, how large the square footage is. You've got one or two employees, and there's some one or two like weirdos poking around. Are they gonna buy something? Maybe someone buys a sweater, once an hour or something, and you're saying, so like the profit margin on like, I don't know, a few items of clothing a day or whatever, even if it's a lot, like, does that pay for the rent and utilities and the employee's salary? Yeah, I don't know how any non sort of big block retail competes with Walmart. And then of course Amazon. They say that Amazon's actually more of a competition to Walmart than even like say Target is. And I even put 20 years on this too, because I think Walmart pretty much started obliterating retail, non-corporate retail, about 20 years ago. Service business, again, there's people that have done it. If you are extremely creative, intelligent, hardworking, never give up, and you have the luck of the gods on your side. But just an example, like back in the day, there wasn't as much centralization and saturation, but also they've created a barrier to entry through all these regulations, compliance issues, environmental, health, and safety standards, and sort of the other thing is the quality. So if you're going to be running a business, the idea is that you're the manager or the CEO. You start off as the manager, and you kind of fill in doing everybody's job until you get employees, and you step in as the actual manager, and then you hire a manager, and then in theory you sit, air quote, on your butt and collect the income. But think about the concept of the average person, the average employee that a boomer started his business in 1980 or 85, right? The average family, good morals, they've got enough money, they're not like too poor. The culture is still kind of like eugenic and patriotic and like, do no wrong, love thy neighbor, all this kind of stuff. And then it was not multicultural, it was still kind of a monoracial, or if not, it could have somewhat of a friendly biracial thing. The insane feminism and all that stuff wasn't going on. The political divide was like one day a year, but you could have Thanksgiving and all that. So, the average person's just stressed, and I'm on the employee side at this point too, but the point I'm trying to make is that you try to start your own business. Like, there was a time when you could get an employee and they were like a good, yes sir, I'll start, and they'll be there on time, and in a given year you train them up for a few weeks, and they would actually do this thing called initiative, and count every penny for the most part, and do a good job for you. But now you probably wouldn't be able to trust them nearly as much. Not even from a malicious, just from a, like, if something's like slightly outside their scope, that you can't trust people to do that. I've been on the management side of things, and it's happened to me. So the idea of like, just read this book about leadership and then like apply these principles, it's assuming the people under you are operating with a certain level of integrity and competency. And it's not really there anymore. That could be a service business or a restaurant and all Moving on to contingency. So, investing in trading, it used to be a lot more, yeah, this could be its own video and all that, but just how there are algorithms going on, there's psychological manipulation, and there's fraudulent markets. And I've realized that I think it's almost like these markets, they're almost designed by like reptilians to transfer money from people that are impatient and have like a weaker disposition to like holding through losses, to those who are able to hold and have patience and psychological resolve. And the other issue is that, again, it's like the fundamental analysis no longer works because we're buying into all these asset classes at all-time highs that's propped up by, what they used to call money printing or quantitative easing. One thing that I remember I used to look into is this concept of like, a stock should be evaluated on a PE ratio. It's like if it's over 16, that means it's overvalued and it's probably going to be crashing. And when I looked at that, this was a decade ago, and even back then there were companies that I think were approaching 100. Their PE ratios were approaching 100. Just like right now, the stuff that's going on with this Nvidia is just mind-boggling. So the idea of in investing like a long term into like whether it's real estate, bonds, or trash, and stocks are just they're just so overdue for some sort of a large crash, but the Fed keeps printing money. So like you want to buy, so the Fed just stops, it could just end. So yeah, the idea of like doing that and then trading, like it's one of those situations where like 1% does very well, 10% maybe, makes enough to afford a studio apartment, and the other 90 like lose their shirts. So I think that's a ship that sailed for the most part. Put an asterisk here for crypto and AI, but it's something you'd have to be extremely careful and have that resolve that I talked about earlier, and that would be for another video. It's potential for something there. But the military, trust me, don't do it. You're not fighting for the United States. So first, from a moral perspective, I think at this point we all know what's going on there. Best case scenario, you're fighting for economic stability of the empire. Worst case scenario, you're fighting for the interests of the global satanic cabal that uses the United States and NATO for its own aims, and there's a little bit of trickle-down effect to the economic zones that they're located in. But also you have your DEI. Back when I was in, it was the war on terror, which, it sucked, but, most of us weren't coming home like in a body bag, injured or losing friends. It was a very low KIA conflict, but it still sucked, like going to these shitty places and having to spend like a year there, and just the job itself, it's a hard job. If the situation was good, you were in a real homogenous country with real patriotism and the people were worth fighting for, that's a different story. But really wouldn't recommend it from both a moral and pragmatic perspective. And there is really good chances of a civil war with the government ordering you to be on the wrong side, as well as world war breaking out on multiple fronts. And that's probably a topic for other video. So, no, guys, do not join the military. Sorry. Other city relocation. So this is kind of from an American perspective, but it could also be similar in like Canada, Australia, New Zealand, maybe even the UK kind of a thing. So you move to like the big city, like a New York City or LA, just over congested, dangerous. This is where, you know, you're trying to like make money, right? But you're gonna end up like, I don't know how people are doing it in the regular cities at this point, let alone those cities. Because the inflation there is just at the absolute worst. I remember visiting New York City. I only visited there like 2 or 3 times a day. But it just felt like just getting there was money, but it felt like I was just bleeding money no matter what I did there. And I was not being like bawling or anything like that. But that's also where the jobs are. So you work to basically be poor, working to work, you know, going to places like that. Rural relocation, it's not actually even cheap anymore. Yeah, it's way cheaper than you know, these places or even the other cities, but what do you get? You know, lack of goods and services, boomers, all the people on drugs. There's not going to be any chicks there. Probably won't even be or that many dudes your own age to make friends, and there's no jobs or growth. It's a little peaceful sometimes. You might be able to have a sort of blasé, kind of funless life in some town with no one to hang out with. Still also struggling financially, but it's not really an option, especially because I guess moving to a city, there's more of a, we're in the big city, it's okay, but when you move to a small town trying to make friends, it doesn't work quite as much, especially I guess the older you are too. So not really an option. Contingency. Emergency. Passport, bro. Again, this is not saying that none of these things aren't a little better than, say, this one here, but even this is not what it used to be. Imagine some American, say in the year 2005, visits Vietnam or China or freaking Mexico, right? They are the freaking, like a hero. Like, it wasn't that many that would do it. You have real money. The dollar is strong. I think people liked America back then too. Just perception. I think like the world was still like, yeah, America. America liked America. America doesn't like America anymore, anyways. But the rest of the world's kind of over America at this point, and can't really blame them. But even if that wasn't the case, it's already been done. Like, it's just, you know, a lot of like the what's it called, sex tourism, but also just so much like oversaturation. And it used to be maybe like a cooler, creative, more adventurous, maybe even a little bit of a younger guy with some money who was like legitimately interested in the culture, and that's gotten kind of oversaturated. Not to say that it's still not a good idea depending on your situation, but it's not what it used to be, you know. And I'd say somewhere in the last 5 to 10 years, probably not that great anymore. Going off the grid, man, being a prepper and all that. Even this, it's become more expensive. You know, the amount of like rural unclaimed land that's also suitable for prepping or desirable is, you know, back when they first started about prepping, I'm thinking about that movie Tremors, that dude, that kind of a thing. That might have been like right in the heyday of it, kind of set off a new phase of it. But it's more stigmatized in the media, less availability, and there's also a lot of permitting and zoning issues. Homelessness. Even this has gotten worse in the recent days, and it's more dangerous. There's a lot more people that are homeless, and there are a lot of them, you know, back in the day was a hobo singing a song under the bridge with that stick in the bag, and maybe a lot more, you know, if say the homeless population was 1 to 100 before, but now it's like 5 to 95 or something like that. The people are less charitable to homeless people, and they just kind of want to get away with them. So even if you are the nice guy that's just kind of down on his luck, it's just people don't want to interact with them anymore, and I can't blame them. And it's also becoming legal in a lot of cities. And highlighted this last one there, but you know, I won't recommend it. I wouldn't recommend to do it, but if you happen to get in a situation, sometimes that might actually be a better situation than the alternatives that you actually have economically without a support network. Thanks for listening. Sorry about the interruption there at the end, and let me know if there's any other sort of mainstream paths that average people take and where that would fit in this. Thanks for listening.